Who were the Pharisees? The word Pharisee in Aramaic is perushim, which means to separate and distance oneself. So the Pharisees were known as the separated ones. From around 200 BC to the end of the first century, the Pharisees were seen as a Jewish religious community, a tight knit brotherhood that distinguished themselves from other Jewish groups, such as the Sadducees and the Essenes, and especially from the more common Jewish man. They were seen as a society of scholars entrusted with the sacred duty of reading, copying, transmitting, teaching, and applying the law of Moses and prophecy. They were distinguished by their strict observance of the law and the traditions of men, which they called the oral law. To most of the first century Jewish people, they were highly respected and esteemed, looked up to as religious leaders and scholars for the Jewish faith. Some well known Pharisees in the times of the first century are Nicodemus, found in John chapter 3, Gamliel, found in Acts chapter 5, Rabbi Shaul, who converted to following Yeshua and being renamed Paul in Acts chapter 8 and 9, and Josephus, whose writings are outside the Bible but are used as a great historical resource to better understand the first century Jewish faith. What did the Pharisees believe? As mentioned earlier, the Pharisees' reputation and school of thought was one of strict observance of the law of Moses and the traditions of the oral law. They kept the written law of Yahweh, but also had an oral law on top of the law of Yahweh, which they recognized as having equal authority. They leaned heavily on the laws of purity meant for the temple and the priesthood, but the Pharisees extended it to the common man in their daily life, which Yeshua called at times a heavy burden too hard to bear. Matthew 23, verse 4, Yeshua said, "They tie up heavy burdens, hard to bear, and lay them on people's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to move them with their finger." Pharisees and Yeshua. The Pharisees were seen at times as being overly strict, as opposed to Yeshua, who kept the basics of the Torah and the more important meaning of the law of Yahweh, without adding unnecessary traditions to it, which made him look like he was too laid back compared to the Pharisees. Yeshua was even being falsely accused of breaking the law, which we know he never did. The friction got even more heated when Yeshua began claiming his authority as the Messiah, also known as the Son of Yahweh, which means he's been given the highest authority any human can receive, which would make Yeshua of higher rank and importance than the Pharisees, which the Pharisees saw as a threat. John 5, verse 22 and 23. For the Father judges no one, but has committed all judgment to the Son, that all should honor the Son, just as they honor the Father. He who does not honor the Son does not honor the Father who sent him. John 5:43. I have come in my Father's name, or authority, and you do not receive me. If another comes in his own name, him you will receive. Here's an example of the two sides having a strong disagreement. As stated before, the Pharisees separated themselves from anyone who didn't uphold a strict daily life of purity, which came from their man made tradition and not necessarily the law of Yahweh. This meant that they would never be caught eating or communing with what they considered the common crowd. But Yeshua, being a rabbi, was constantly seen breaking bread and drawing close to the common crowds, and thus the debates would begin. Luke 15, verse 1 and 2. Then all the tax collectors and the sinners drew near to him, that is Yeshua, to hear him. And the Pharisees and scribes complained, saying, This man receives sinners and eats with them. Yeshua will go on to tell a parable of how he is the shepherd searching for the lost sheep, even to the furthest and lowest class of people. The traditions of men versus the commandments of Yahweh. The Torah does not command that you must wash your hands every time you eat, and so it's not a sin to eat with unwashed hands. But the Pharisees wanted to enforce their tradition on top of the law, saying that you need to wash your hands in a specific way every time you eat. Otherwise, they label you unclean and even a sinner. But Rabbi Yeshua came along claiming higher authority than them, saying that he's allowed his disciples to eat without washing their hands. And once again, a public, heated debate began. Rabbi Yeshua rebuked the Pharisees by saying that they are going too far with their strict interpretation of the law and their man made traditions. Matthew 15, verse 1 through 3. Then the scribes and Pharisees who were from Jerusalem came to Yeshua, saying, Why do your disciples transgress the tradition of the elders? For they do not wash their hands when they eat bread. He answered and said to them, Why do you also transgress the commandments of Yahweh because of your tradition? Verse 10 and 11. When he had called the multitude to himself, he said to them, Hear and understand. Not what goes into the mouth defiles a man, but what comes out of the mouth, this defiles a man. Please leave a fact that you know about the Pharisees that might have not been mentioned in the video. I hope this video gives you a good introduction of who the Pharisees were and what they were about, and even why they were so often seen as butting heads with the Messiah, Yeshua. Thank you, and shalom.